She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood in line quiet, composed, respectful, first-class ticket in hand. And still, they pulled her off the plane. Not because she posed a threat, not because she violated any policy, but because of something quieter, something far more insidious. Assumption. A decision born from a glance, a whisper, a nod from someone in a uniform who decided she didn't belong. They removed her publicly, with no explanation, no apology, no shame. What they didn't know, not the gate agent with the rigid smile, not the supervisor watching smugly from behind his tablet, not even the captain who averted his gaze as she passed down the aisle, was that the woman they had just humiliated was not simply another passenger. She held something none of them could see, something that could dismantle their next $4 billion deal with a single decision. This wasn't just a story about race. It was about perception, about quiet authority forced into the light, and what happens when underestimated power finally chooses to speak. It was just past 6 in the morning when Kendra Ellis stepped into Terminal C. The airport, still shrouded in the hush of early daybreak, buzzed with the quiet symphony of suitcase wheels, yawning passengers, and far-off flight announcements echoing across sterile tile floors. She wore a simple gray trench, faded denim jeans, and sneakers worn soft from years of wear. Nothing flashy. No luxury brands. No statement accessories. Just a canvas tote slung over her shoulder, practical, unassuming. Inside that tote, beneath a neatly folded scarf, sat a sealed envelope. Thick paper, wax-stamped, and marked confidential. But no one noticed. No one looked closely. Kendra moved with a kind of quiet composure that made her nearly invisible, an aura of self-containment that asked for no attention. She wasn't there to be noticed. She was there to observe. At the check-in desk, a man in a navy blazer looked up briefly from his monitor and then glanced away. "Priority line is for first class and executive travelers only," he said without checking her credentials. Wordlessly, Kendra lifted her phone, screen aglow with her digital boarding pass. 1A. First class. He blinked and then smiled a tight, obligatory smile that barely masked his discomfort. "Right. My mistake." At security, her pre-check clearance was overlooked. "Random screening," the agent muttered, waving her aside. No eye contact. No words. Just monotone protocol delivered with the kind of mechanical detachment born of quiet prejudice. Kendra didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She'd seen this before. She watched them, their movements, their faces, filing them away silently as she slipped off her coat and shoes. Each step closer to her gate felt like walking through fog. Faces glanced, then quickly looked away. The silence that clung to her wasn't indifferent sight, was tension. She stepped up to the TSA agent, handed over her passport and boarding pass. He scanned the documents with studied slowness, flipping through the pages deliberately. His eyes lifted and met hers for a beat longer than necessary. From the periphery, Kendra caught 2 other agents whispering. She couldn't make out all the words, but the cadence was unmistakable. One snickered quietly. "Definitely her," he said under his breath, as if she weren't standing just feet away. She tightened her grip on the edge of the screening table, but said nothing. She didn't need to. Her restraint wasn't submission. It was calculation. Her strength wasn't in her voice. It was in her silence. When she finally reached the gate and boarded the plane, the atmosphere shifted. The air inside the cabin felt thinner, more alert. She moved down the aisle, passing rows of passengers already settled with their coffees and complimentary newspapers. She reached seat 1A and slid her bag into the overhead bin, careful and methodical. A woman in the aisle seat looked up, stiffened slightly, and clutched her handbag closer. It was subtle, but it was there, the unspoken suggestion that Kendra was out of place. She sat, adjusted her jacket, and waited. A flight attendant walked past, smiling broadly at the other passengers, greeting them by title and surname. When she reached Kendra's row, her expression flattened. No smile, no welcome, just a glance, and then she moved on. Kendra watched. Everything. Passengers on either side were offered drinks. One was given orange juice with ice and a warm towel. Another received a sparkling water with lemon. The attendants passed Kendra without a word. No drink. No doubt. Just a hollow silence wrapped in civility. The weight of invisibility pressed against her. But she said nothing. The envelope stayed on her lap. A man across the aisle leaned toward his companion. "She's in first," he whispered. Not a question. A judgment. As if the seat itself accused her of trespassing. Further down, a flight attendant chuckled quietly. "Use points," she muttered. Kendra didn't turn. She didn't react. Inside, however, a storm began to swell. Every glance, every whisper was etched into memory. The flight leveled. Cabin lights dimmed. The service resumed. The staff approached Kendra again, this time with forced courtesy. "Excuse me, ma'am," one attendant said too sweetly. "We need you to move to the back of the plane due to weight distribution. Just a safety precaution." She didn't blink. "No," she replied. Simple. Calm. Final. The attendant hesitated, lips parting slightly in surprise. He gave a tight nod and stepped away, but the ripple had already begun. Moments later, murmurs of non-compliant passenger spread through the crew. The captain was notified. A behavior note was filed. A security alert flagged. Kendra remained still, watching the storm gather around her, quiet and prepared. The plane landed. She was the last to disembark. Two uniformed officers waited at the gate, expressionless. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us for identity verification." No resistance. No questions. Just a nod. They led her through the terminal into a cold, windowless room. Sterile. Empty. She sat quietly at the center of the interrogation table. Across from her, the airline supervisor entered, face pinched and skeptical. "This seat wasn't assigned to you," he said, sliding the boarding pass across the table like a piece of evidence. Kendra didn't speak. Instead, she reached in her tote and pulled out the envelope. She placed it on the table, untied the wax seal, and unfolded the thick paper inside. The room changed. The document was official. Signed, stamped, dated. At the top, Nexus Capital Holdings. At the bottom, Kendra Ellis, lead signatory. Between those lines, terms for a $4 billion merger. A merger involving the very airline that had just treated her like an intruder. The supervisor froze. His mouth opened, then closed. His fingers fumbled for his phone. "Call legal," he whispered to the officer beside him. The panic was instant. Internal memos fired off in every direction. Audits initiated. Security tapes reviewed. Crew logs dissected. What began as a quiet incident now erupted into a corporate wildfire. By the time the dust settled, several crew members had been placed on administrative leave. Internal investigations launched. Apologies drafted but left unsent. The boardroom, once secure in its confidence, now trembled beneath the weight of what it had ignored. The CEO read her name and went pale. She wasn't a passenger, someone said in the meeting. She was the verifier. The merger was put on hold indefinitely. And Kendra, she walked out of that sterile room with the same quiet grace she walked in with. Calm, composed, dignified. In the terminal, whispers followed her. "That's her," someone murmured. "The woman they pulled off the plane." She kept walking, because power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply waits watching Gunnel the moment arrives, and then it lands like justice. By the time Kendra Ellis reached the curbside and slipped quietly into the back seat of a waiting sedan, the fuse had already been lit. What began as an invisible slight at Gate C-17 was now spiraling into something far more dangerous visibility. And the moment people like Kendra became visible, systems built on assumption began to crack. Inside the airline's corporate headquarters, a sleek tower of glass and pride perched along a manicured business park in Arlington. Emergency meetings were called before the morning even fully arrived. Legal departments scrambled. PR advisors whispered behind closed doors. The CEO, a man used to commanding respect with a single glance, sat stiffly in his leather chair, his usual calm replaced with a taut, simmering dread. "This woman," he said, holding up the printed security report, "was forcibly removed from the plane." He turned the page. And this woman, he continued, holding up a contract, holds the only signature that can finalize or destroy our merger with Nexus. The room was silent. His executive team, once so composed, now looked like children awaiting punishment. "Do we know why?" one of the board members asked, voice brittle. "Why she was removed?" the CEO snapped. "Because our staff assumed something. They saw a black woman in first class with no entourage, no designer bag, and thought she was in the wrong seat." An intern in legal whispered to his supervisor, who leaned in with a frown. "Sir, it's already online." The CEO's eyes narrowed. "What's online?" "A gate agent's TikTok," the intern said, nervous. She was venting about being forced to let some uppity woman board first class with a digital pass. "It's got over 200,000 views. And climbing." The CEO's silence was worse than a scream. In another wing of the building, the crisis communications team huddled around glowing monitors, their expressions pale. "Don't post anything yet," the director said. "We don't control the narrative. We need to understand who she is before we issue any kind of statement." But the narrative, like power, had already left the building. Kendra didn't return home immediately. She directed the driver downtown in Steto, an unmarked office building across from a courthouse. There, she ascended 12 floors to a suite with no signage, only a glass door etched with the initials NCH. Nexus Capital Holdings. Her world. Her rules. Inside, her assistant stood at attention, holding a tablet, already aware. "MS. Ellis," she said, her voice firm but low. "We've received confirmation. The airline's general counsel called for a meeting with our legal team. They're requesting a private arbitration." Kendra set her tote down, removed her coat, and walked to the window. The city buzzed beneath her, but her reflection was still, composed. "Tell them no," she said. Her assistant hesitated. "They're offering a formal apology. Direct from the CEO." Kendra turned, her voice cool. "We don't accept apologies written by committees." She sat, crossed her legs, and opened her laptop. "Send the footage to our compliance division. I want timestamps, transcripts, and name tags. Every employee who interacted with me. Every report filed." "Yes, ma'am." "And notify the board," she added. "Tell them the Ellis clause is in effect." Her assistant blinked. "That's only for—" "I know what it's for," Kendra said calmly. "Use it." Across town, newsrooms began receiving anonymous tips. A high-profile deal, a secret executive, a major airline involved in a discrimination scandal. Editors hesitated only for a moment before greenlighting the story. Within hours, headlines began to spread like a controlled wildfire. Corporate America had poked a sleeping storm, and now they were about to learn just how quietly vengeance could move. Inside the boardroom of the airline's top floor, the temperature dropped with every refresh of the stock tracker. The first leak appeared on Bloomberg. Then CNN picked it up. Then Forbes. "Why wasn't I told she was involved at this level?" The CEO hissed, pacing. "Why didn't anyone tell me who she was?" "Because she didn't tell us," the COO said, exasperated. "She didn't announce herself. No security. No title drop. She just boarded like anyone else." "She's not anyone else," the CEO exploded. "She's the gatekeeper to $4 billion. Another exec cleared his throat. "Sir, the board wants to discuss contingency planning. If she pulls out," the implication hung in the air. If Kendra Ellis withdrew her signature, the merger would collapse. And so would the airline. Meanwhile, inside Nexus Capital's towering conference room, the board sat in calm contrast to the chaos outside. Kendra's image lit up the main screen still, composed, carrying the same canvas tote she traveled with. They watched the footage in silence. The dismissive glances, the ignored greetings, the fabricated weight distribution lie. At the end of the video, no one spoke. Then one of the board members, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward. "Do we move forward with the deal?" she asked. Kendra met her gaze. "Would you?" There was no need for further explanation. They all knew the answer. "No," the board member said. Another added, "We back you, Kendra. If this is how they treat unknown power, they have no place handling it. And just like that, the merger for $4 billion in carefully negotiated assets, leverage, and goodwill was frozen. Not canceled, just left to rot in purgatory. The airline issued a press release by evening. Stale, formal, devoid of accountability. "We are investigating an incident involving a valued customer," it began. Kendra read it once, then closed her screen. Her phone buzzed. It was the airline's CEO. He'd finally found her number. She let it ring. Then silence. Then another message. A text this time. Short. Pleading. "Please. Let's fix this." She replied with 2 words. "Show receipts." The next morning, the airline stock fell 6%. Investors called emergency meetings. Journalists hounded executives outside headquarters. A scheduled press conference was abruptly canceled, replaced by a hastily recorded apology video that looked more like a hostage confession than contrition. And Kendra, she went back to work, not to retaliate, to restore. She met with teams across Nexus, emphasizing ethics, dignity, and the power of silence. She funded a grant to train airline staff in cultural awareness. She created a new clause in all future contracts, human dignity provisions, enforceable and binding with measurable penalties. And still, she said nothing to the media, because real power doesn't need to shout. By the end of the week, the airline offered to restart the merger with triple the original concessions. Kendra declined. Instead, she sent a private message to every board member of the airline's parent company. It was a transcript of everything said on the flight, and at the bottom, a note in her elegant, steady script. "You mistook where I sat for who I am. That mistake cost you more than a seat." Within 48 hours, the airline CEO resigned. The flight crew was permanently dismissed. New policies were announced. New leadership installed. And Kendra Ellis? She remained silent. But the world no longer was.